Why did the heat feel heavier around her than everyone else? The Arizona desert didn't just burn, it pressed. It sat on shoulders, crept into lungs, made men impatient and sloppy. At 115 degrees, even seasoned Marines were breathing like the air had weight. Mirage waves bent the horizon. Targets at 1,800 yards looked liquid, like they might slide off their stands and disappear. Missed high and right again. Master Sergeant Blake Rourke's voice cut through the range like gravel dragged across steel. He stood over the prone shooter with arms crossed, a monument of muscle and old scars, his shadow falling across the recruit's rifle. Rourke had broken better men than this. Everyone knew it. "I'm compensating, Sergeant," the recruit gasped, sweat pooling under his cheek weld. "The heat's warping everything." "It's not the heat," Rourke snapped. "It's fear you're flinching." A few feet behind the firing line, barely noticed, Harper Cole wiped her hands on a rag already black with oil. She wasn't supposed to be part of this moment. She was the quiet one in dirty coveralls, the woman who replaced extractors, retorqued mounts, fixed other people's mistakes, the one Marines waved over only when something jammed or failed. The tech. She watched the rifle vibrate after the shot. Not recoil, something subtler, wrong. Her spine ached, a low, constant reminder, but she stepped forward anyway. "Sergeant," she said, calm, almost gentle. His scope mount loose. You can see the micro-shift after recoil. If he fires again, he's going to strip the threads. The range went quiet. Rourke turned slowly, like a predator deciding whether something was worth killing. "Did I ask for a mechanic's opinion?" The word mechanic landed harder than the heat. "Get back to your bench," he continued. "This is a shooter's mat. You fix guns, we shoot them, know your place." Harper didn't move. She reached toward the Barrett resting on the table nearby, instinct guiding her fingers toward the mount. Rourke slapped her hand away. "Don't touch that," he sneered. "Wrong gun, sweetheart, that's a man's weapon. 30 pounds, you'll break a nail." Laughter rolled down the line, low, casual, certain. Harper looked at her hands, oil-stained, calloused, steady. She said nothing. Because there were truths she'd learned the hard way, and one of them was this: dignity didn't beg for space. It waited. She stepped back into the heat. To them, she was invisible again, just the armorer, just the girl who cleaned their weapons and vanished. They didn't see the way her eyes tracked the wind flags. They didn't hear the math already forming in her head. They didn't know her heart rate could drop on command. And they certainly didn't know why she was really here. 3 years earlier, she hadn't been fixing rifles. She'd been firing them from places most people couldn't stand. Before the crash, before the doctors, before the word grounded became permanent. Harper Cole had once been trusted with shots that couldn't miss, from moving decks, open doors, collapsing rooftops. She'd learned balance where there was none, control where chaos lived. Then Yemen took her spine. Metal screaming, rotor failure, impact. She remembered waking up unable to feel her legs, the desert sky spinning above her, thinking not about pain, but about distance, about whether she'd ever feel recoil again. The doctors were kind. That almost hurt worse. "You won't ruck heavy gear," they told her. "Be grateful you can walk." So she fought rehab months, years. They gave her a choice in the end, desk or discharge. She chose proximity. The armory kept her close enough to remember who she'd been. Close enough to ache. Now, as another shooter missed wide, Harper felt the familiar pull, the quiet hunger to solve a problem no one else could see. Then the convoy arrived. Black SUVs cut across the dust like a line drawn too cleanly. Admiral Hackett stepped out, crisp, unsmiling, eyes already assessing. "Aerial threat simulation," he announced. 2,000 yards, moving target. The laughter vanished. Rourke paled. Wind gusted hard, 20 knots and shifting. The equipment wasn't set for this. Everyone knew it. Excuses formed. None survived the admiral's stare. The drone launched like a hornet, screaming across the sky. Fire! Shots cracked. Heavy rifles bucked uselessly. Prone shooters fought angles they couldn't win. The berm blocked elevation. Everyone saw it. "We need to stand," someone yelled. "You don't fire a .50 standing up," Rourke shouted back. "That's suicide." The drone kept coming. Then the sirens began. Real ones. Not training, not simulated. Radar lit up, 3 contacts fast low. This time the fear wasn't theoretical. Rourke froze. The distance closed too quickly. The math turned ugly. And Harper moved. She didn't ask permission. She grabbed the Barrett. The same one he'd told her not to touch. And for the first time that day, the heat didn't feel heavy at all. It felt familiar. Like the moment just before a breath is released. And somewhere inside her, something old, something unbroken, finally stood up. Why did no one stop her when she lifted the rifle? It wasn't bravery that moved Harper Cole forward. It was inevitability. The kind that settles in your bones when you've already lost everything once and learned what still matters. The Barrett felt heavier than memory suggested. 30 pounds of steel and consequence. She welcomed it. Pain was honest. Pain didn't lie to her the way people did. "Put that down," Rourke shouted again, his voice cracking now. "You'll kill yourself." Harper didn't look at him. She was already walking. The berm rose like a wall of failure in front of the firing line, blocking elevation, blocking hope. Beyond it, the drone cut a jagged path through the air, closing fast, humming with intent. 2,000 yards, then less again. Every second counted. She reached the ruined concrete pillar near the edge of the range, leftover debris from some forgotten structure. It wasn't ideal. Nothing ever was, but it was high enough. Her boots dug into the gravel. She slammed the bipod legs against the concrete, bracing the rifle with practiced efficiency. Not hurried, never hurried. Standing supported. A position so rare most shooters only talked about it in theory. A position that punished hesitation and exposed weakness immediately. She leaned forward, body weight committed, spine screaming as old nerves flared awake. For a brief moment, doubt whispered. Not about the shot. About whether her body would obey her again. Her injury had taught her limits. It reminded her of them every morning, every step. There were movements she avoided now, twists that sent lightning through her back, recoil that could collapse her if she wasn't perfect. And perfection was a dangerous thing to chase. But the drone didn't care about her history. The ammo dump didn't care about her pain. The people standing behind her didn't care, not yet. So she exhaled. The world narrowed. Sound softened. Heat vanished. The shouting behind her dissolved into something distant and unimportant. There was only the scope. The dot. The wind. Her heart rate dropped the way it always did. 38 beats per minute. A body remembering its truest language. Lead time. Wind value. Spin drift. Math wasn't cold to her. It was intimate. It was the last place she felt safe. Target acquired, she whispered, not for anyone else, just to anchor herself. She squeezed. The rifle roared. Recoil slammed into her like a vehicle collision. For a fraction of a second, she felt herself lift, spine compressed, boots skidding, and then she absorbed it, forcing herself forward again before gravity could steal the moment. Downrange, a black puff bloomed against the sky. Silence. Then someone screamed. Hit, drone 1 is down. Harper was already cycling the bolt. Clack. Clack. Her shoulder burned now, deep and sharp, but she welcomed it. Pain meant she was still inside her body. The second drone juked left, reacting, smarter than the first. Good. She adjusted her stance, shifting her feet with millimeter precision, hips compensating for sway. The barrel tracked smoothly, impossibly, like it belonged to something lighter. She didn't think about the Marines watching her. She didn't think about Rourke's face. She didn't think about Yemen. Boom! Dust shook loose from the pillar. Her teeth rattled. The rifle tried to tear itself free from her grip. She held. 3 seconds stretched into something elastic. Then the second drone ruptured midair, scattering fragments like dark rain. One left, someone yelled. Harper already knew. The last drone changed behavior, diving hard, straight toward the fuel trucks parked near the perimeter. A desperate move, a lethal one. Her angle disappeared as the pillar blocked the downward line. For the first time, hesitation flickered. If she stayed braced, she'd lose the shot. If she stepped out, she'd have no support. Unsupported, standing, with a .50. Every instructor she'd ever had would have called it madness. Her back screamed a warning, a reminder of limits, of surgeries, of doctors' voices telling her what she would never do again. She stepped anyway. The rifle came fully to her shoulder, unsupported, her offhand gripping the forend with white-knuckled control. She timed her breathing the way she had on a Zodiac boat years ago, letting the sway peak and settle. This was the moment where everything could fail. She fired. The recoil threw her back 2 steps. Pain lanced up her spine, sharp enough to blur her vision. She almost went down. Almost. Downrange, the third drone vanished in a fireball just above the ground. 50 feet from catastrophe. Silence slammed into the range. No cheers, no shouts, just ringing ears and stunned breath. Harper lowered the rifle slowly. Her hands trembled now, adrenaline fatting, pain flooding in to claim its due. She cleared the chamber, removed the magazine, mechanical, automatic. Rourke stood frozen, mouth open, the man who had once seemed immovable now looking unmoored. The torque held, Harper said quietly, nodding toward the scope. You're welcome. That should have been the end. It never is. Ground assault, Southgate breach, the radio screamed. The drones had been a distraction. 2 technicals smashed through the perimeter fence, mounted guns already firing, dirt erupting around them as they surged toward the Admiral's position. The snipers were useless at this range. Long rifles, wrong tools. Rourke drew his pistol, panic flashing across his face. Harper didn't wait for orders. She dropped the Barrett. Too slow, too heavy now. She sprinted for the nearest SUV, her limp barely visible, pain buried under momentum. She dove into the back seat and grabbed the go bag she knew would be there. Muscle memory again. Always memory. MK-18, compact, familiar. She rolled out of the vehicle as rounds cracked overhead. The lead truck was close now, too close. Harper moved forward. Not recklessly, intentionally. Controlled burst stitched through the windshield. The driver jerked, slumped. The truck veered and smashed into a barrier, metal screaming. The second gunner swung toward her, barrel tracking, chewing the ground where she'd been a heartbeat earlier. She slid on her knees across the gravel, sparks biting at her boots as rounds passed overhead. With her left hand, she pulled a grenade. With her right, she kept firing. The throw was perfect. The explosion was not cinematic. It was violent and final. Smoke swallowed the truck. Harper rose, scanning, reloading, breathing hard now, the cost finally catching up. Sector clear, she said, voice steady despite the shaking in her hands. Only then did she feel it, the ache, the deep tremor in her spine, the weight of what she'd just forced her body to do. She walked to the Admiral, checking him like a bodyguard would. No ceremony, no salute. You good, sir? Hackett stared at her like he was seeing a ghost step out of a machine. Recognition dawned slowly, carefully. "Petty Officer Cole," he said, "or Chief." She gave a tired half-smile. "Doctors lie, sir." Rourke stood nearby, smaller now, quieter. Humiliation sat on him heavily, but so did something else. Respect. When he finally extended his hand, it wasn't performative. It was earned. "I was wrong," he said, "about all of it." Harper shook his hand. Her grip was firm despite the pain. "I didn't break a nail," she replied, "but I think I broke your range record." Later, as the dust settled and the adrenaline drained, she limped back toward the armory, tool bag over her shoulder. No one laughed now. They watched her go in silence, realizing too late what had been standing among them all along. She didn't look back. Some truths don't need witnesses. They just need the courage to stand, even when everything tells you to stay down. Why did the silence afterward feel heavier than the gun ever had? It came slowly, creeping in once the sirens died and the smoke thinned. The kind of silence that doesn't celebrate. It evaluates. It asks questions no one is ready to answer. Harper felt it as she crossed the range, each step measured, each breath careful. Adrenaline had abandoned her without apology, leaving pain in its place. Her spine burned now, a deep, insistent ache that reminded her of every reason she'd been told not to do what she just did. She kept walking anyway. Behind her, voices rose in fragments. Medics, security teams, someone swearing softly, someone else laughing in disbelief, the brittle kind that comes when fear has nowhere else to go. She didn't turn around, because if she did, she might see the looks. The awe, the recalculation, the sudden desire to explain her. She learned long ago that admiration could be as dangerous as contempt. Inside the armory, the air was cooler, dimmer. It smelled like solvent and steel, familiar, grounding. Harper set her tool bag down with care, hands shaking just enough to annoy her. She flexed her fingers, waiting for them to steady. They didn't. She leaned against the workbench, closed her eyes, and let herself feel it. The cost. Pain radiated from her lower back, sharp spikes riding beneath a deeper throb. She knew the signs. She pushed past her margin. Maybe not broken anything, but close enough that the line would need time to forgive her. Time she wasn't sure she'd be allowed. The door creaked. She opened her eyes. Admiral Hackett stood in the doorway, jacket removed, posture relaxed in a way that signaled this wasn't an inspection anymore. It was a conversation. "Mind if I come in?" he asked. She shrugged. "It's your base, sir." He stepped inside, taking in the neatly arranged benches, the labeled drawers, the meticulous order. He smiled faintly. "They always put ghosts in places like this," he said quietly. Harper stiffened. "That's not an insult," he added. "It's a compliment." She didn't answer. Compliments had edges. She waited. Hackett leaned against a table, folding his arms. "You know this complicates things." "Yes, sir." "You are cleared for limited duty." "Yes, sir." "You just fired a .50 caliber rifle standing, engaged multiple targets, and led a close-quarters counter-assault." "Yes, sir." He studied her for a long moment, not judging, assessing. "Are you in pain?" She considered lying. "Yes, sir." He nodded. Figures. There it was, the moment she'd been dreading since her finger first touched the trigger. "Consequences. They'll want to write this up," he continued. "Medical will want imaging. Command will want explanations. There are people who won't like what you reminded them of today." Harper looked down at her hands, still stained, still steady enough. "I didn't do it to make a point," she said. "I know. I did it because no one else could." "I know that too." Silence settled again, softer this time. Hackett pushed off the table. "You saved lives today, possibly a lot of them." She met his eyes, That doesn't always matter. A corner of his mouth lifted. No, it doesn't. He straightened. Get checked out officially, I'll handle the rest. As he turned to leave, he paused. For what it's worth, he said, standing shots like that, they're not about strength. She waited. They're about trust, he finished. In your body, in your instincts, in yourself. Then he was gone. Harper exhaled slowly, the tension easing just enough to make the pain flare brighter. She sat. For the first time since the shots, she allowed herself to feel tired. Hours passed in a blur of controlled chaos. Statements, checks, medics insisting she lie down while she insisted she was fine. She compromised by sitting still. Rourke came by once, awkward and sincere, standing too straight in the doorway. I owe you more than an apology, he said. She shook her head. You owe your shooters better. He swallowed. I'll do better. She believed him. Marines tended to mean it when they said things like that. Night fell over the base quietly, desert cooling fast, stars emerging like witnesses. Harper stood outside the armory alone, leaning against the wall, watching her breath fog faintly. That was when the doubt crept in. Not about the shots. About what came next. She broken the illusion they'd carefully built around her, the quiet armorer, the safe placement, the controlled risk. Today reminded everyone that she wasn't broken in the ways they preferred. That made her dangerous. Footsteps approached. Can't sleep either, a voice asked. She turned to see one of the younger Marines, the same recruit who'd been missing wide earlier. His face was different now, quieter, humbled. No, she said. He nodded, staring out at the range. I kept thinking, if you hadn't spoken up earlier, my rifle might have failed. If you hadn't taken the shot. He trailed off. You did fine, Harper said. You listened. He smiled faintly. They won't forget what you did today. She didn't answer. Because forgetting wasn't the danger. Remembering was. Later, alone in her quarters, Harper lay on her back staring at the ceiling, the hum of the bass settling into nighttime rhythm. Pain pulsed steadily now, a reminder ticking away beneath her ribs. Her mind drifted, not to Yemen, not to the crash, but to the moment before she stepped away from the pillar. The moment she'd chosen to trust herself again. That was the part that scared her. Because trust invited possibility. And possibility invited loss. She learned that lesson once already, under a foreign sky, with rotors screaming and gravity doing what it always did. A knock sounded at her door. She froze, then rose carefully and opened it. A sealed envelope waited on the floor. No name, just a stamp. She picked it up, fingers tingling. Inside was a single page. An evaluation request. A medical review. And a line that made her breath catch. Potential return to operational advisory status. Advisory. Not operator. Close enough to taste, far enough to hurt. She sat back down on the edge of her bunk, envelope trembling slightly in her hand. Today had proven what she could do. Tomorrow would decide what she was allowed to be. Outside, the range lay quiet under the stars, steel targets untouched, wind flags barely moving. Somewhere out there, the distance waited. And Harper Cole wondered, not for the first time, whether standing up again had saved her. Or whether it had reopened a war she'd barely survived the first time. What if proving you still mattered was the most dangerous mission of all? Harper didn't sleep that night. She lay still, listening to the bass breathe around her, generators humming, distant boots on concrete, the faint whistle of desert wind slipping through gaps in old structures. Pain kept time with her pulse, steady and insistent, but it wasn't the pain that held her awake. It was the envelope. It sat on the small metal desk across the room, unopened now, as if it might change its meaning if she looked at it again. Potential return to operational advisory status. Not operator. Never quite allowed to say the word. Advisory was a cage dressed up as a compromise, close enough to the edge to smell the dust, far enough away to never touch it. It meant she would train others to do the things her body had proven it still could, but that command no longer trusted it to survive. Harper turned onto her side carefully, jaw tightening as her back protested. She stared at the blank wall and remembered another sleepless night years ago, thousands of miles away. Yemen. The smell of fuel, the screaming metal, the moment gravity stopped being a theory and became a verdict. She had trusted her body then too. It hadn't failed her, not exactly. It had just paid the price. By morning the base was buzzing again. Word had spread, quietly but completely. Marines who'd barely noticed her before nodded now. Some tried to meet her eyes. Some didn't know where to look at all. She kept her head down. Respect, she'd learned, often came wrapped in expectation. At the medical wing, the lights were too bright and the chairs too hard. Doctors spoke in calm, neutral tones, asking careful questions that avoided the real one. Why would you risk this again? Scans were ordered, movements tested, pain measured not by how it felt but by how well she hid it. Any numbness? No. Any instability? No. Pain level? She paused, manageable. The doctor frowned slightly. He'd heard that word before. It rarely meant what people thought it did. Later, she found herself back at the range, not as a shooter but as an observer. Rourke stood at the firing line, postured different now, less rigid, more listening. Wind's shifting, Harper said quietly. He nodded without hesitation, relaying the correction. The recruit from yesterday adjusted and fired. Hit. A murmur ran through the line. Harper felt something unexpected tighten in her chest. Pride. It startled her. She hadn't realized how much she'd missed this. Not the trigger, not the recoil, but the moment when someone else succeeded because you'd helped them see. Still, when the shooters broke and laughter returned, she drifted back toward the armory, where expectations couldn't follow her so easily. That afternoon the call came. Not an order, an invitation. Admiral Hackett's voice was measured over the secure line. There's a review board forming. They want your input. On what, sir? On you. She almost laughed. The board met in a windowless room that smelled faintly of old paper and coffee. Men and women in uniforms with histories she could read in their posture. Some knew her file. Some knew only the version they'd been allowed to see. They asked about the shot. She answered with physics. They asked about the assault. She answered with timing. They asked about her injury. That one she answered carefully. I know my limits, she said. I also know when they matter less than the mission. A pause. That's not always the same thing, one of them said. No, she agreed, it is. When it was over, she walked out unsure whether she defended herself or damned herself. Days passed. The desert returned to routine, drills, maintenance, silence. Harper worked. She fixed weapons. She trained hands that would someday pull triggers she wasn't allowed to anymore. She felt the ache in her back every night and learned, again, how to live beside it. Then the alert came. Not an attack, not a drill. An overseas incident, urban, unstable. Advisors embedded with a partner force had lost their Overwatch asset. Sniper injured, evac uncertain. They needed remote guidance. Someone who could see the shot without being there. Someone who understood instability. Harper read the brief twice. Then a third time. This wasn't combat, not officially. But it was close. Hackett found her in the armory, leaning over a disassembled rifle. They asked for you by name, he said. She didn't look up. They don't know me. They know what you did. She straightened slowly. And if I say no, then someone else will try, he said, and maybe they won't see what you see. There it was again. The same quiet pressure, the same moral weight. She nodded once. Send the feed. The screen flickered to life. Grainy rooftops, heat shimmer, a city holding its breath. Harper leaned closer, eyes narrowing, mind slipping back into that familiar, dangerous clarity. Tell him to wait, she said into the mic. The wind's lying to him. On the other end of the world, a shooter listened. Minutes stretched. Then a distant crack through the speakers. Target neutralized, came the reply. Harper closed her eyes. It wasn't the same as pulling the trigger. But it mattered. That night alone again, she stood outside under the stars, back aching, heart steady. She realized something then. Redemption wasn't about returning to who you were. It was about deciding who you were allowed to become. And sometimes, standing up wasn't about the shot at all. It was about refusing to disappear quietly. The desert wind moved across the range, gentle now, almost forgiving. Harper breathed it in and let herself hope, carefully, that this time she might be strong enough to carry both the skill and the cost. Because strength, she was learning, wasn't proven in moments of violence. It was proven in the long, quiet aftermath. When no one was watching. What happens when the world finally believes in you, and you're not sure you believe in yourself anymore? Harper learned about the deployment in pieces. Not from an announcement, not from a ceremony, from the way conversation stopped when she entered a room, from the sudden politeness layered over uncertainty, from the fact that her name was no longer followed by the armorer, but by a pause. Advisory assets don't usually make people nervous. She did. The assignment was precise in its language and evasive in its intent. Forward Overwatch cell, embedded analysts, remote and on-site coordination, a role built for plausible deniability, close enough to shape outcomes, far enough to avoid blame. Her back protested as she packed, every movement deliberate. She learned to fold pain into routine to make it part of the checklist. Meds, brace, stretch, repeat. Rourke watched from the doorway. You don't have to prove anything, he said. She didn't look up. I know. It wasn't a lie, it just wasn't the whole truth. The flight was long and quiet, the kind of quiet that presses thoughts forward. She watched clouds slide beneath the aircraft and wondered when altitude had started to feel safer than ground. The city they deployed to didn't welcome anyone. Concrete stacked on concrete, heat trapped between walls, sound echoing without warning. Rooftops were crowded, lines of sight cluttered. Instability lived in the details. Perfect conditions for mistakes. Her cell worked from a half-finished building, screens glowing in the dim, cables snaking across the floor. The local force was competent but stretched thin. Too many threats, too few eyes. Harper took her place behind the monitors, posture careful, mind already mapping angles. The shooter, young, tense, talented, lay prone 2 blocks away, heart rate visible on her screen. His breathing was fast. Slow it down, Harper said softly into the mic. You're ahead of the shot. I see the target, he replied. I know, but you don't feel him yet. Silence. She guided him through the wait, through the lie of the wind between buildings, through the way heat rose unevenly from sun-warmed concrete. When the shot came, it was clean. A small success, one of many. Days blurred together. Sleep came in fragments. Pain followed her like a shadow she pretended not to see. She stayed behind the screens, behind the advisory roll, behind the line she'd promised not to cross. Until the night everything shifted. The call came after midnight, an informant compromised, a team pinned in a stairwell, Overwatch down, shooter injured. They needed eyes now. Harper felt the old pull immediately, the dangerous clarity. Feed me the location, she said. We can route it to another cell. There isn't time. Hackett's voice came over the secure channel. Harper, this would put you forward. I know. A pause heavy. Your advisory. I'm also the only one who can stabilize this. The silence stretched. Then proceed. She moved through the city with the team, every step calculated, every jolt of pain carefully ignored. The stairwell was dark, air thick with dust and fear. The injured shooter lay slumped against the wall, leg bleeding, eyes wide. Harper knelt beside him, hands steady. You did nothing wrong, she said quietly. I couldn't see it, he whispered. I know. She took his place. The rifle was lighter than the Barrett, still heavy enough. She braced against the wall, standing, no room to go prone, no time to doubt. Her back flared in warning. She breathed anyway. The target moved in the street below, half hidden, momentary. She waited, then fired. The recoil hit, pain surged, the shot landed. The team exhaled as one. Extraction followed, fast, controlled, final. Later, alone in a dim room, Harper sat on the floor, back against the wall, shaking now that it was over. Not from fear. From the cost. Hackett found her there. You crossed the line, he said gently. I know. You saved them. She closed her eyes. That doesn't erase the risk. No, he agreed, but it defines the choice. Medical evaluation came swift and uncompromising. Imaging confirmed what she'd suspected. Damage. Not catastrophic, but cumulative, another line drawn. The board met again. This time, the room felt different. They spoke of value, of impact, of limits. They offered her a path forward. Not operator. Not armorer. Instructor, mentor, advisor with authority. A role that would let her shape dozens of outcomes instead of one, if she could accept it. Harper took a long breath. I don't need to be the one pulling the trigger, she said, but I need to be close enough to make it count. The decision was unanimous. On her last night before redeployment home, she stood on the rooftop alone, city lights flickering below like distant fires. She thought about the standing shot in the desert, about the line she'd crossed there too. Strength, she realized, wasn't about refusing limits. It was about choosing where to spend what you had left. Some battles were won with a single impossible shot. Others were won by knowing when to let someone else take it. And dignity, real dignity, wasn't loud. It didn't demand recognition. It simply stayed. When the noise finally fades, who are you left standing with? Harper asked herself that question on the flight home, watching the horizon bend slowly beneath the wing. There were no headlines waiting for her, no ceremony, no formal closure, just a quiet return to a base that would never see her the same way again. And she wasn't sure she wanted it to. The desert greeted her with familiar indifference. Same heat, same wind, same steel targets catching light like distant mirrors, but something had shifted in the spaces between people. Marines nodded with a different weight now, not curiosity, not disbelief. Recognition. She walked the range alone that first morning, boots crunching softly on gravel, the silence unbroken by commands or gunfire. Her back still hurt. It probably always would. Pain had stopped being an enemy and become a constant companion, one she negotiated with instead of fought. She paused near the concrete pillar, the one she'd leaned into, the one that had held just long enough. Her hand rested against its rough surface, cool in the early morning, unremarkable, and yet it had been the difference between catastrophe and survival. People liked to believe moments like that were about courage, or anger, or proving someone wrong. They weren't. They were about decision. She decided to stand when everything told her not to, decided to trust a body that had betrayed her once before, decided that her worth wasn't measured by permission. Later inside the armory, she worked quietly, adjusting scopes, replacing worn parts, answering questions that came more frequently now. Not challenges, questions. How did you know the wind was lying? What do you feel right before you fire? How do you trust your body again? She answered some. Others she let them find on their own. Rourke watched her from a distance, pride and humility settling into him in equal measure. He ran the range differently now, less shouting, more listening. One afternoon, he handed her a rifle. "Not to shoot," he said quickly, "to teach." She hesitated, then nodded. The class gathered loosely, a mix of experience and nerves. Harper stood in front of them, hands resting lightly on the table, posture careful but grounded. "I'm not here to make you better shooters," she began. "I'm here to help you understand why you miss." They leaned in. She talked about impatience, about fear dressed up as confidence, about how the body always tells the truth before the mind is ready to hear it. She didn't mention standing shots. She didn't mention Yemen. She didn't need to. Weeks passed. Her new role took shape naturally. Advisory, instructional, operationally adjacent, close enough to feel relevant, far enough to heal. There were nights she still woke up with phantom weight on her shoulder. Days when her back flared without warning and reminded her of everything she'd lost. But there were also moments she hadn't expected. Watching a shooter correct himself without being told. Seeing a recruit slow his breathing because he remembered her voice. Hearing someone say, "She showed me another way to think about it." Those moments landed differently. One evening, long after the range had emptied, Harper sat alone at the bench, cleaning a rifle she hadn't fired. Her movements were precise, familiar, meditative. Hackett joined her quietly. "You've changed the culture here," he said. She didn't look up. "I didn't mean to." "I know," he replied. "Those are the ones who do." He studied her for a moment. "Do you regret it?" She paused, cloth resting against steel. Regret was a complicated thing. It assumed an alternate version of yourself still existed somewhere, waiting. "I regret the pain," she said finally. "I don't regret standing." He nodded. "Command wants to formalize your position," he said. "Permanent advisory authority, training doctrine input. You'd shape how this base, maybe others, approach long-range engagement." She set the rifle down. "Will it keep people alive?" "Yes." "Then I'll take it." That night, Harper walked the perimeter one last time before darkness fully settled. The stars were sharp above her, the desert quiet in a way that felt earned. She stopped, took a slow breath, and stood very still. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't measuring distance. She wasn't calculating wind. She wasn't proving anything. She was simply present. The standing shot would follow her forever. People would tell it wrong, louder, bigger, cleaner than it really was. They would forget the pain, the doubt, the fear that almost kept her seated. That was fine. Stories weren't for accuracy. They were for meaning. And the meaning she carried forward was simpler than any legend. That strength doesn't always announce itself. That skill doesn't require permission. That dignity doesn't argue. Sometimes, the person everyone overlooks is the one holding everything together. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do isn't pulling the trigger. It's standing up quietly, steadily, and choosing to act when it matters most. Because in the end, weapons don't define warriors. Moments do. And sometimes, dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.